tonight. The big story we're watching for you. Are we going to enter a brand new week with further restrictions in terms of responding then to what is an alarming increase in the rate of infection of COVID-19 in this country? Scientists telling us yesterday that the Delta variant is now seemingly the more dominant variant in South Africa. What does it mean for our health response? These are some of the questions that we'll be putting to experts over the next hour and a half as we anticipate the address by President Cyril Ramaphosa later on tonight. Our reporters are out and about different parts of the country watching the situation, and of course many people still enjoying what is their Sunday evenings, and I suppose there'll be big questions about whether or not this is going to be the final time that public gatherings, at least in the way that we're seeing them, will continue. Well, let's talk then about government's response to this pandemic and invite onto the show Mmusi Maimane, who'll be giving us his own personal take. Mmusi, let me just bring you in immediately into this conversation. Your own reflections on how government has fared so far when it comes to being prepared, and that's a really important word, being prepared for the worst case scenario where COVID-19 is concerned.
Good evening, and good evening to fellow South Africans. I think this is tantamount to the worst government failure we have seen in recent times, primarily because it is not as though this third wave is a huge surprise to us. I think many South Africans could tell you adequately that it was well on its way. It is clear to us that infection rates are exceeding the state's capability to be able to provide hospitalization should we need to do so. We have no vaccines to speak of. But the worst is that I feel the leadership decisions, as has been expressed widely, is that if you knew 2 weeks ago you'd be here today, anything you say and do today is almost 2 weeks too late as we head towards a peak. Kathy, so I feel as a nation, we are orphaned by a government that has failed its role as its protective parenting measure. And ultimately, to use that metaphor, says it's been the grandest leadership failure and the grandest government failure of our time. And I feel that this is something that this particular government must account for as we answer the very difficult question, which is, as families tonight are waiting for loved ones who are now in hospital, some without beds, have to be able to respond to this crisis and say, what is their response? How does their solace in a time that a government could have done better?
One of the things that really boggles the mind, Mr. Maimane, is that government has from the beginning said that it is taking a data-led approach, and that information which guides their actions is coming through from the experts and the scientists. We now know that it was in March already that the Ministerial Advisory Committee advised government on a number of plans to put in place, warning of the third wave. And today they're saying, well, it doesn't look like any of our recommendations were taken on board and that the country did not prepare the way that it needed to.
Absolutely, Kathy. And even against the data, I just think that this government has failed. 52,000 new infections in the last 3 days alone. When you look at the fact that even a province like Gauteng already has 51% of all active cases, it's not as though Gauteng did not know. If the Premier is to be believed that 1 in 3 people are carrying the virus, it's a serious issue. The fact of the matter is that we've been promised vaccines and our vaccine rollout is poor. Up to date, only 2.6 million vaccinations have taken place. So frankly, I think when you look at the grand nature of the project and you look at the numbers, the data itself that the government would have relied on, it is common cause that they did nothing to prepare in this regard. And even more seriously, when you look at the measures they could have taken, a simple measure would have been to bring the school holidays forward. I think I made this call 2 weeks ago to say we need to bring the school holidays further. That would have reduced effectively a movement of over 12 million people who are already in the schooling system that would have asked to stay at home. But these are simple decisions that could have been made in the midst of a crisis. And now, tonight, we are probably going to be told about more plans, more promises, stricter restrictions, and almost as though this is a government that has led itself to a point of no return. Kathy, I must say this at the risk accountability must be felt here. We cannot simply sit back here and say, well, it's fait accompli, and citizens must be blamed either for not wearing masks or washing their hands. Citizens here were looking for a government to vaccinate them. Citizens were looking for a government to make decisions about shutting schools. That government has failed. If people in other countries are able to resign at such scandals, why is there nobody in our government who's put up their hands and say, here, we have failed citizens and we must account? Is corruption the only threshold upon which we judge people? Or in this instance, is the competence of ministers, the presidency, etc., able to respond? Instead, we get treated with a deputy president who's going on leave and a president who's going to give us a speech tonight that will tell us the facts that we already know, really without a tangible plan.
Musi, I suppose on one level it's easier to bemoan what hasn't happened or even what should have happened. We're in the eye of the storm currently. What needs to happen right now to ensure that as many South African lives are protected, while at the same time ensuring that industries that have been decimated over the past year are not yet put through that same process over and over again?
Well, I think, Kathy, a number of interventions are necessary. The first one is that at least at a basic minimum, schools in Gauteng must shut with immediate effect. We must give ourselves the space to reduce the number of kids being transported, the gatherings that are taking place. We must do that with immediate effect. Secondly, and that would have implications as to what you do in the rest of the country. That's in the education sector. That's adjusting the schooling timetable. We will lose no teaching time if we just simply adjust the timetable and move it on by a week or lose a week or in the long run. So I think we need to take that action. Secondly, we need to accelerate the amount of vaccination that we can do. It will give teachers, and I think we shouldn't be discriminate about age of teacher. We should discriminate almost immediately. Thirdly, which is most crucial, I think when it comes to public funds and the procurement of vaccine, there needs to be better transparency on that. So ultimately, one of two processes are required: a parliamentary process that puts the facts. The president must go and brief parliament, answer questions tonight to journalists such as yourself, such as Newzroom, such as channels, to be able to say, give us the transparency of information as to where vaccines are at, how are they being procured, so that we have a better dialogue as a country. And then when it comes to economic plans, certainly look at key sectors that are important, that right now at this point manage how restaurants can operate, how experiences limit gatherings and allow for actually food to be transported, and ensure that when you put those restrictions on the table, that certainly food and services sector, banking sector, some of our mining sectors who have already called to vaccinate their staff can be able to proceed. So I think it needs a much more succinct plan that is put on the table, and I would put those 4 action plans almost immediately. We are beyond the point of trying to ask people simply to wash their hands and wear more masks and limit gatherings. I just think now it's a time for deliberate action.
One of the difficulties just on the issue of transparency is that government has not been forthcoming. We've had organizations, including the South African Medical Association, asking for the minutes of the meetings for the National Coronavirus Command Council to be made public so that we can see when decisions are being made, what advice they're being made on, and also what are the suggestions that are not being taken up. So the things that are not ending up gazetted or even part of government policy. Are you worried about that?
Kathy, the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa is set up as a body that is meant to have our own public representatives, subject matter expertise, scrutiny on data, and ultimately a sense upon which accountability can be effected. There is a failure of Parliament here, and I don't think we should let those political parties who don't sit on the executive get away with the fact that they haven't done a job of saying, can an ad hoc committee be established immediately so that when the president is summoned to come and account there, he can give this information. It is the forum upon which we, the people, get to listen, debate, and be able to observe. and ultimately industry specialists, all the various role players are coming. Instead, we have a national command center that meets in secret, a cabinet that meets in secret, and then ultimately Parliament that has not been able to interrogate this information. It is long overdue. We needed to have a parliamentary inquiry, but more seriously, over a long period of time. In the same way as Zondo Commission can be publicly made, I think it's incumbent upon our public representatives to be able to come and answer questions in a public forum. Why is it that the president is okay at giving an interview in an international platform, but not okay in South Africa? What is he there to hide? Surely he must be faced up to the same scrutiny as everybody else, so that he is the spokesperson of the National Command Council. So when it comes to data and information and subpoenaing it, it ought to be delivered in Parliament, and right there, citizens have entitled to listen to it and be able to gain that information. Because if we say we're a parliament of the people, by the people, then at this point in time, it seems like it's a parliament of the politicians rather than the people.
One South Africa Movement's Musi Maimane. Let's leave it there for tonight. Mr. Maimane, thanks for your time.